Boker Tov, good morning. Welcome to Tanya and You, Chapter 3. Chapter 3 means this is the fourth class because we had an intro. We had Chapter 1, Chapter 2. And in Chapter 3, we find out something fascinating. We find a little secret behind Chabad. This is the chapter we talk about Chabad. So let's bring you up to speed. So if you remember in Chapter 1, the Tanya introduced to us the concept of the two souls, the animalistic soul, the natural soul, and the divine soul, the godly soul, the altruistic soul. And we spoke briefly in chapter 1, at the end of chapter 1, about the characteristics of the animal soul, the instincts, the survival mode, thinking about self, all, if not many if not all, of our negative characteristics stem from the animal soul. And then in chapter 2, we started this long journey of understanding the godly soul, the divine soul. And we spoke about the source of it, where it comes from. It's a piece of God, like children of God, who came into God thought about us even before the rest of creation. We spoke about the idea of this soul of to connect with God, to do things selflessly for God. In chapter 3 and 4 and 5, he develops the functionality of the soul. How does it function? What's the structure of the soul? To better understand what the soul is all about. And as we mentioned, when the Tanya refers to this as a soul, not as an inclination. It's not that the feeling of doing something good, I have an instinct, I have an inclination to do something right, or I have an inclination to do something wrong. It's more than that. When we refer to it as a soul, the divine soul, it means there's a whole structure to the soul. There's its own set of intellect, its own set of emotions that belong to this soul and also belong to the animalistic soul. But the way that Tanya is structured is that we really focus on the divine soul. We elaborate, we analyze it, we explain what it is, and then we understand that we also have something similar in the animalistic soul. So the Tanya in chapter 3 opens up with talking about that this soul, this godly soul, has 10 powers, 10 faculties. And for those of you who are studying with us on JLI, a lot of the ideas that we're studying over there is actually sourced in the Tanya. So you'll see some of these ideas, the way it's developed in the Tanya. Talks about these 10 faculties and the way they're structured is fascinating. And this kind of gives us a little, sheds some light to the idea of Chabad, as I mentioned previously, because Chabad today, we think of the movement Chabad, we think the way of life, but Chabad is really an acronym of Chokhmah, Binah, Da'at, the three faculties of our mind, of the intellect. And it develops in this chapter of the Tanya, we develop these ideas, and really, it's a philosophy. The idea of Chabad is living your life based on this type of philosophy of mind controlling your heart. See, generally, we are products of our circumstances, right? Take a regular day. You get up in the morning, you walk outside, you see a tall building. So what do you think? Tall building. You see cars, you see traffic. Think about traffic, right? Your life goes on based on the circumstances that surround you. You stub your toe. Okay, so now what? I got to figure out. I have pain. I have to change my schedule, right? Things happen based on what happens to you. You have little control of your day. Once took a time management webinar, or was it a workshop? And the first thing they told us is, don't start your day with your emails. You open so many emails, very important emails, right? I got to go through my emails and then answer people and figure out. Don't start your day with emails. Emails are very important. You have to communicate. But what happens if you start with emails? You basically you're saying that I'm not in control of the rest of my day because I don't know what people are going to be speaking to me about. There may be an emergency. There may be something very interesting. There may be something that's going to cause me to have to devote a number of hours to something, right? So I'm not in control. So I wake up in the morning. Well, what's your day going to look like today? I don't know because I have all these emails or all these people who are going to approach me, and they're going to decide how my day is going to look. Now, emails may be important for your line of work, and therefore you should set maybe after lunch, I go through emails. You start today, you say, well, what do I need to accomplish today? What's on my to-do list, right? I'm in control. And this is what the Tanya tells us in general in life, because who are we? You know what really shapes us is our emotions. It's how we feel. That's just life, right? If we're in a good mood, we get things done. If we're in a bad mood, right? If you love something, you're gonna get it. If you hate something, right? It's all about our emotions. But the Tanya in chapter 3 tells us you have to be in control of your emotions. You have to allow your emotions to develop based on what you think is right. Easier said than done. So this is the way the Tanya develops this idea. So Tanya opens up starting chapter 3 with saying that these 10 powers, these 10 faculties of the soul can be split into two. You have the intellect and you have the emotions. He refers to the intellect as the mothers. Mothers because they bear fruit, because they give birth to children. So the mothers are the intellect, and the children, the offspring, the descendants are the emotions. I mean, that's right there. That's so powerful. In other words, that the mind develops the heart. Our emotions are developed by our mind, which means it's not that I love it because I saw it and it looks great, or I have this natural feeling for it. I have a love to something because my mind tells me this is the right thing. I mean, usually it's the opposite. Usually because my heart tells me I want to do something, I can figure out why it's good, right? I know it's really unhealthy, but it looks really, really good. And it tastes really good. So I really, really want it. But my mind tells me it's not good. Let me either shut my mind off or let me convince myself. Let me find a reasoning why it still makes sense to do it, right? So usually our minds are controlled by our hearts. The Tanya says that's not healthy. The healthy way of living is our mind has to control our heart. I understand this is right. I'm going to love it. I understand that it's wrong. I'm going to hate it. Imagine that. There's a story of this great chassid. This is going back a number of hundred years ago during the war with the Tsar of Russia and Napoleon of France. And not to get into the whole historic background, at one point there was this great chassid, Rabbi Moshe Meislish, who was set. He was actually a spy for Napoleon. I'm sorry, he was a spy for the Tsar against Napoleon, and he was working in one of the upper offices, higher ups in the French army, as a translator. He was there translating Russian documents for the French. And at one point, Napoleon himself walks into the office. And he looks around, scans the room, and he sees Moshe Meislish. And right away, he runs over to him and he says, "You're a spy!" And as he says that, he puts his hand on Moshe's heart to see how fast it's pounding. Now, even if it wasn't the spy, I think it'll be pounding. Especially if you are a spy. Mm-hmm. He felt his heart, and his heart had a very normal, regular rhythm. It was not pounding any more than regular. And he was saved. He was saved. Later, his friends asked him, says, Ramosha, how did you do that? How did you control yourself like that? You knew that you could have been killed in a second. And he says, well, the Tanya teaches us. Mind controls the heart. Moach shalit ala lev. I had full control over my heart because in my mind I was telling me, calm down, control yourself. That's a powerful, powerful idea in the Tanya, which will be developed over the Tanya. But right away in chapter 3, we see this, where chapter 3 tells us that the mind, the three powers of the mind, bear fruit and give birth to the emotions. So the three powers of the mind, kochot of seichel, of intellect, are, as you mentioned, chokhmah, bina, and da'at. They are translated as chokhmah is wisdom, bina is understanding, and da'at is knowing slash connection slash experience. What does this mean? These words. What's the difference between all these words? And perhaps in English there isn't much of a difference, but the idea, the way that Tanya explains it, is that there's a three-step process to intellect. Process number one is chokhmah. Chokhmah is what we call the spark of wisdom, the intuition, the idea, the undeveloped idea. In other words, sometimes you're thinking and you're trying to solve an issue or trying to understand something, and you're having a difficult time, and then at one moment you say, "I got it." Dylan, what is it? Tell me. What do you have in mind? I don't know. I don't have the words for it yet, but I feel I'm on to something. There's some idea that a flash came into my mind. I need to think about it. I need to develop it, but I feel that something's there. There's that spark, the first intuition, the first flash of chokhmah, of wisdom, before it's developed. That's chokhmah. That's stage number one in intellect. And stage number two is bina. Bina is when we develop this idea. We have the width, the depth of it. It's a fully understood idea. It's an idea that could be conveyed, could be grasped, could be put down on paper. It's an idea. That's chokhmah, and then there's bina. And then there's the third, is da'at. Now, similarly, where does da'at come in, right? How does da'at come into the picture? I have my flash of understanding. I have my developed understanding. That's it. We move on, right? Da'at means connection. And the source of it is from Adam and Eve. It says that Adam, yada et chava, Adam knew his wife Eve, and she got pregnant. So what does it mean? He knew his wife, right? Many people know each other, but they don't get pregnant from each other, right? What does it mean? It means yada in this context means connection, intimacy. So we see that the Torah uses the word da'at in reference to a bond, a connection. What does this mean in the world of intellect? It means that I could understand something intellectually, but I may not be connected to it. It may not be internalized. It may not be real. Now, when we say connection, it means a intellectual connection as well. For example, it says that a katan, a youngster, a minor, a child does not have that. They're missing this faculty. It's undeveloped in the child. In other words, you can have a child with a very high IQ. You can have a child who's very, very wise, brilliant child. A very bright child. When I was in camp, there was a sign in the office. It was like this: light moves faster than sound. That's why some children look bright until they open their mouth. Why was this in the camp's office? I don't know, but this is what it said. Either way, you have a child who's extremely bright and intellectual, and they could understand things. You talk to them intellect, you talk to them ideas, and they get it. They understand it. They can repeat it, right? They're smart. They're smart children, but they're still children, which means that same child may not connect to it. They're missing the dot. So, for example, you tell a child, don't play with fire, it's dangerous. Now, does a child not understand that playing with fire is dangerous? No, they get it. They understand that it's dangerous, but they'll still play with fire. Why? Not because they're trying to be mischievous, because they lack that connection that if it's dangerous, you know what that means? That means don't play with it, right? I remember this. I think I was actually studying this concept in Tanya at the time. So I made that connection years ago at my Shabbos table as a child, where my younger sibling, my younger brother, wanted to make his own kiddush on a cup of wine or grape juice. But we ran out of wine. There was no wine around the table, or it was wine or grape juice. We didn't have any. So he was crying. He says, I want to make kiddush on wine. So my father says, yes, but we don't have wine. It's Shabbos. I'm not going out to the store. There's no way to get wine now. We don't have wine. He's like, I know we don't have wine, but I want to make kiddush on wine. And he was crying. And I remember then making that connection that a Maya does not have that. They know something is not possible, but they still want it. It's not that I'm so sad I couldn't make kiddush on wine, I'm crying. I still want to make kiddush on wine because they lack that connection. It's not as real as it is with an adult that has that. Another example. So this was an example given by one of the great teachers of Hasidus in the previous generation. He says, it's actually very apropos because think of what's going on in Israel right now, right? So there's a war going on. And you see a lot of videos that are coming out from the generals, sitting down and meeting and strategizing and planning, and they obviously know exactly what's going on in the front lines of the war. So you can hear what's going on from the front lines of the war from all the news media and all that. But if you had a soldier who was there at the front lines and they came back and spoke to the general directly, they said, this is what happened. This is where we were. This is what happened. Right? You can't compare that information to someone who lived it to someone who just heard about it. The information may be the same. It may be as accurate. But because they didn't experience it personally, they don't have that same da'at, that connection to the idea. So that's the idea of that. You could understand something, but you could lack a connection to it. And that comes through experience. If I tell you, this family that I know is so poor, destitute, they don't have any food, let's try to help them. You may say, okay, I get it that it's a sad situation, but what am I going to do about it? Nothing much. Maybe I'll help a little bit, right? It's not going to change. But if I take the time to have that, to contemplate on this idea and to connect to this family, and now that same information, nothing changed. I have the same information, but because I have that, I connected to this idea. Now what happens is that is the segue to emotions. That allows my intellect not to be removed, but it connects it to my emotions. It allows emotions to develop because of the intellect. So the Tanya talks about thinking about God, because we're talking about the emotions and intellect of the godly soul. So what does the godly soul think about? Thinks about godly ideas. So the Tanya of chapter 3 talks about 3 specific ideas. It talks about thinking about the greatness of God, how God is the transcendental God, the God that transcends everything. We talk about God who is very much involved and fills the world. That's the God as well that we have to think about, that God is on one hand very transcendental, on the other hand very much present in every area in life. And then we also think about the idea that what are we worth in the face of God? We're like totally worthless. We have no true existence when we're standing before God. We're like nullified in his presence. It's like getting excited about a penny when someone just won the lottery, billions of dollars, right? Who are we in front of God? It's like, what is finite in front of infinity? Thinking about these ideas in our mind, chachma, bina, we develop these ideas. Are we going to start loving God because of it? No, because it remains an intellectual idea. I could be a professor teaching academia, teaching about any subject, and it's totally removed from me. Has nothing to do with my life. I go home, I forget about it. It's in the books. Now I am myself, and I can enjoy life. This is where da'at comes in. Da'at is take these ideas, these lofty, godly ideas, but connect to it, meditate on it, think about it again and again and again. Make it real. God is real. The intellectual ideas become real. And then when I make the strong connection to these ideas, you know what's going to happen? I'm suddenly going to feel a strong urge to connect to God. Wow, God is so great. I want to have a relationship with this guy. I want to have a connection to God. And that is where we start developing a feeling of love. Love also means connection. When you love someone or something, you want to be close to that thing, right? Whether it's another person, you want to have a relationship with this person, want to be close to this person. Whether it's something, an experience, I want to be close with that experience, right? If you love something, that draws you closer to that thing. And then at the same simultaneously, after having a love to God, you're also going to have an awe of God. Yirah, wow, God is so great. I also have this kind of fear, not fear as in like he's going to hit me type of fear, but awe as in like, wow, this is so powerful. Like you feel you're in the presence of the great. So it's not so much a connection to it, but it's really drawing yourself back from it out of great respect of the greatness of God. So you'll have these two kind of opposite emotions simultaneously. You'll have a love to God, which draws you near to God. You also have a awe of God, which kind of sets you back because of the greatness of God. It's called ahava, yira, love and fear that we have to God. These are developed after we have a strong understanding of God, and most importantly, with da'as. Da'at itself, that allows you to develop these two feelings in your heart. Now, we did mention there are 7 emotions of the heart, but what the Tanya says is that all of the 7 really stem from these 2 main feelings of closeness and feeling of separation. Ahava and yira, love and fear. These 2 feelings is really like it calls it like the trunk of the tree, and the rest of them are like these branches that branch out from these 2 feelings, ahava and yira. And most importantly, they come because we develop a strong connection in our heart, in our mind, through chokhmah bina, and most importantly, that in the Chabad circles, those who follow the Tanya, the way of living of the Tanya, there's a strong emphasis on prayer. And when we say prayer, we don't always mean just opening the prayer book and reading words, right? We can open, we can read, and we don't only mean even understanding what you're meaning and what you're reading and praying to God, asking for your needs or whatever type of prayer. But there's this concept of tefillah ba'arichut, which means you pray, but you don't. You're not looking at the clock. You're not being timed over here. You're being fully engulfed and fully engrossed in your prayer. And it became such a concept that when we pray, even if sometimes the minyan is going a little faster, we take our time. Obviously, on a weekday may be difficult, but on a Shabbos, on a holiday, a day that there's no work, we have a few extra minutes. We take extra time to pray. It became such a like set in stone type of custom where it almost became like if you want to know if this synagogue is a Chabad synagogue, do they have a second room to the synagogue? Because what happened was that there are so many people praying, and many people are praying with a regular minyan, and they're finished, and they start talking, they start to mingle, they start to socialize. And then there are those who are still praying and they want to have a quiet location. So they used to build like an off room, like a second room to the main room where people were able to sit and pray. So much so where there was a certain point that there were many, if you know the old history of the Hasidic movement, there was some opposition, and at one point it was like, if you want to know which synagogue you're walking into, you got to see if there's a second room, because that's where people sit and pray. But what was this emphasis on prayer? The emphasis was da'at. Da'at means connectivity, experience. You have to experience your prayers. When you experience it, it becomes real. This is how we could develop an ahava and yirah, fear and love to God. So when we pray, and we know that a lot of our prayers are talking about the greatness of God. A lot of it's from Psalms uh, or other prayers and verses from the Torah that talk about God's greatness. I can understand how God is great, but I have to experience it. It's not the same. That takes time. That really takes time. There was a story with this chassid of I'm trying to remember which rebbe it was, but he was on business and he would travel to the marketplace once a year, Leipzig, wherever it was. It took him a few weeks to travel. He would buy the merchandise. He would come home, and then he and his wife, they would sell it in the marketplace, and then he was able to sit and study and take his take some a lighter schedule to study and things like that. And then a few months later, he would make the trip again. So there was a chassid who used to pray for many hours every day. So this businessman asked this chassid, "What takes you so long to pray?" I also think about the great spiritual and kabbalistic ideas behind the prayer, but it doesn't take me so long to pray. What takes you so long to pray? So this chassid answers, says, "I don't understand. Every year you take a few weeks off to travel to Leipzig to buy all the merchandise. Why do you have to actually travel all the way there? It takes so much time and effort. Why can't you just think about it? Think it. Close your eyes. Imagine you're getting onto the horse and buggy. You're making the trek all the way to Leipzig. You find the merchandise, you buy it, you come home. In modern terms, you get on a plane, you go to China, you get the merchandise, and you come home. Why do you actually have to go there? Why can't you just think about it?" So the businessman is confused. He says, "Well, I need the actual merchandise. Thinking about it is not going to help. I need the merchandise." The chassid says, "Well, that's exactly why it takes me so long to pray. I can't just think about it. I have to experience it because I need the merchandise." The merchandise is developing a connection, a relationship, an emotional relationship with God. An emotional relationship with God doesn't come easy. It comes when we develop it in our mind and we connect to the ideas. Connection takes time. You got to think about it. You have to put yourself into that position, to that situation, and make it real. That takes time. You can't just think about some lofty Kabbalistic ideas and you're good to go. You have to put yourself into that situation. Connect yourself to these ideas, these lofty, godly ideas. That takes time. That's why especially when we pray, take an extra few moments. We close our eyes. We forget about our surroundings. We say, "This is where I am now. Let me fully be engrossed in these ideas." It's not necessarily have to have a better understanding of it, but it's to experience it, to make it real. What does this mean to me? How do I develop through this a connection to it, and ahava and yirah? This is what the Tanya chapter 3 really talks about. If I have to sum it up, live your life, not happenstance, whatever happens to me, this is the way I live my life. Let our mind control our heart. The godly soul has these 10 powers, 10 faculties, 3 of intellect, 7 of emotions. And the way it works is the mind controls the heart. We spoke about chokhmah, binah, dat, wisdom, understanding, and connectivity, experience to the understanding. And through that, it develops a feeling in the heart. There are 7 feelings, 7 emotions, but primarily there is the ahava, the love to God, which is a feeling of closeness, and there's the yirah, the awe and fear of God, which is a feeling of distance. And from that, basically, stem all the rest of the emotions as well. So that is a summary of chapter 3. If you haven't read it inside, please, there's so much more nuances to the idea, which you can see in the book, in the Tanya. And next week, we'll continue with chapter 4.
Okay.
Thank you all for joining us.
Oh, okay. Rabbi, I have a question.